The year was 2847, and humanity had enjoyed peace for almost 300 years. People had forgotten what war truly meant. Children grew up reading about ancient battles in history books, never imagining that such horrors could return. The United Earth Coalition maintained a small defense fleet that patrolled trade routes and chased away the occasional pirate ship. Nobody thought they would ever need anything more powerful. But deep in the frozen darkness beyond Neptune, hidden inside a hollowed asteroid called Bunker Omega, something ancient waited in silence. The USS Blackstar had been sleeping for nearly 3 centuries. She was a dreadnought-class battleship, a monster of war measuring almost 4 kilometers from front to back. Her hull was painted in a black so deep that it seemed to swallow light itself. Weapons covered every surface of her body, cannons and missile tubes and energy projectors that modern engineers could barely understand. She had been built during the Unification Wars, a terrible time when humans fought each other with weapons designed to crack planets apart. Admiral Catherine Cole stood on the command deck of Coalition Station Prime, watching her tactical display with growing horror. Red signatures filled the screen like a spreading disease. She was 62 years old and had spent her entire adult life in the Navy. She had always believed she would retire peacefully, spending her final years gardening on the moon colony where she grew up. That dream was dying before her eyes. The Vectari, Dominion, had come for humanity. They arrived through 17 different jump points at the same moment, their fleet numbering in the thousands. The Vectari were insectoid creatures, their bodies covered in hard shells the color of dried blood. They had conquered 47 worlds across the galaxy, wiping out or enslaving every intelligent species they encountered. Their scouts had watched humanity for decades, studying their ships, their weapons, their society. They had concluded that humans were soft and weak, easy prey for the mighty Dominion. The first battle lasted 6 hours. Admiral Cole watched helplessly as her ships were torn apart by enemy fire. Coalition vessels fought bravely, but their weapons barely scratched the Vectari hulls. When the shooting stopped, 237 human ships had been destroyed. The Vectari had lost only 11. Cole read the casualty reports with a face made of stone. Behind her, Commander Daniel Hughes shifted his weight nervously. He was a young man, barely 30, with bright eyes that had grown dim over the past week. He had watched friends die in those first engagements, and the experience had changed him. "Admiral," he said quietly, "we have received authorization from the Security Council. Protocol Omega has been approved." Cole did not respond immediately. She stared at the tactical display, watching as more red signatures poured through the jump points. The Vectari were not stopping. They would keep coming until every human was dead or in chains. She thought about her grandmother, who had told her stories about the Unification Wars when she was a little girl. Her grandmother had survived the bombing of Chicago, had watched the sky burn orange for 3 days straight. She had described the weapons that humanity created during those dark times. Machines of destruction so terrible that the survivors had sworn to never use them again. The Blackstar was the last of those machines. "Send the activation codes," Cole said finally. Her voice did not waver. "Wake her up." Hughes nodded and turned to his console. His fingers moved across the keys, entering the sequence that had remained unused for 3 centuries. Somewhere in the outer solar system, ancient systems began to stir. Lights flickered on in corridors that had known only darkness. Reactors that had been cold for generations started their long awakening. On Earth, the news spread quickly. The Vectari fleet was advancing toward the inner planets, destroying everything in its path. Colony after colony fell silent, their distress calls cutting off mid-sentence. Refugees fled toward Earth in whatever ships they could find, bringing stories of horror and death. The coalition government broadcast emergency messages to every human settlement. They told people to remain calm, to trust in the Navy, to believe that humanity would survive. But behind closed doors, the politicians and generals knew the truth. The regular fleet could not stop the Vectari. Nothing in their current arsenal could even slow them down. Their only hope was sleeping in an asteroid beyond Neptune. Admiral Cole traveled to Bunker Omega, aboard a fast courier ship. The journey took 3 days, and she spent every hour reviewing the Blackstar specifications. The ship had been built to fight in wars where planets were acceptable casualties. Her main guns could punch through anything the Vectari had shown so far. Her armor was thick enough to survive direct nuclear strikes. Her engines could accelerate her massive bulk faster than most modern frigates, but she was also old. Her systems had been designed before anyone alive today was born. Her computer networks used programming languages that had been obsolete for 2 centuries. Finding crew members who could actually operate her would be almost impossible. When Cole arrived at Bunker Omega, she found that she was not alone. Ships were already gathering, shuttles and transports carrying volunteers from across human space. Word had spread through unofficial channels, through retired veterans and engineering guilds and military families. People who understood what the Blackstar represented had dropped everything to answer her call. Cole watched from the observation board as the massive ship slowly came into view. The Blackstar filled her vision, blocking out the stars behind her. Even after 300 years, even covered in dust and dormant systems, she was the most terrifying thing Cole had ever seen. A communication came through from the ship. The voice was old and tired, but there was iron underneath it. "This is Chief Maintenance Officer Patricia Vance. The Blackstar is waking up, Admiral. She is angry about being disturbed, but she is ready to fight." Cole smiled for the first time in days. It was not a pleasant smile. "Good," she said, "because we have a lot of enemies that need killing." The Blackstar's running lights flickered on one by one, spreading across her hull like stars being born. Deep inside her, engines that had not fired in 3 centuries began to warm. Weapon systems ran diagnostic checks, finding themselves in working order despite the long sleep. Humanity had tried to forget what they were capable of during times of war. They had buried their most terrible weapons, hoping they would never be needed again. The Vectari were about to remind them why that had been a mistake. Patricia Vance had worked at Bunker Omega for 3 years before the war began. She was part of a skeleton crew of 40 people who maintained the sleeping giant, running basic diagnostics and keeping the dust from settling too thick on ancient consoles. Most days she wondered if her assignment was some kind of punishment handed down by an officer she had offended. The Blackstar was a relic, a reminder of darker times that the Coalition preferred to forget. Then the activation codes arrived and her entire world changed within 72 hours. People started pouring into the bunker. They came on shuttles, on cargo haulers, on personal yachts and converted mining vessels. They came from every corner of human space, dropping their lives at a moment's notice. Veterans who had served in border conflicts pulled their old uniforms out of storage. Engineers quit their jobs at civilian shipyards without a backward glance. Young volunteers showed up with nothing but determination and a willingness to learn. Patricia watched them arrive from her station near the main airlock. She saw gray-haired men and women walking with the stiff discipline of career military, their eyes sharp despite their age. She saw young technicians carrying toolboxes that looked brand new, their faces pale with fear and excitement. She saw families saying goodbye through viewport windows, lovers holding each other one last time before duty pulled them apart. Captain Marcus Brennan arrived on the 3rd day. He was 56 years old, with silver at his temples and thick calluses on his hands from years of farm work. He had commanded a cruiser called the Relentless during the border conflicts of the 2820s, earning a reputation for tactical brilliance and stubborn courage. After retirement, he had moved to Mars and spent 15 years growing soybeans in the red dirt. When the Victory attacked, he had been checking moisture levels in his fields. He left his farm without harvesting a single crop. Patricia met him at the airlock, saluting crisply despite the chaos around them. Brennan returned the salute with a tired smile. "Lieutenant Commander Vance, I presume," he said. "I've read your maintenance reports. You've kept her in better shape than I expected." "She's tougher than she looks, sir. The old engineers built her to last." Brennan nodded and walked toward the observation window. The Blackstar filled the view, her massive hull illuminated by work lights as repair crews swarmed over her surface. He stood there for a long moment, just looking at her. "She's beautiful," he said quietly. There was something almost religious in his voice. Chief Engineer Samuel Torres emerged from a nearby maintenance hatch, his uniform already covered in grease and burn marks. He was a stocky man with a thick black mustache and arms like tree trunks. His reputation in engineering circles was legendary. People said he could make a ship run on nothing but spare parts and pure stubbornness. "She's a nightmare, Captain," Torres said bluntly. "Half these systems haven't been manufactured in 200 years. I've got my people fabricating replacement parts from raw materials because we can't find them anywhere else. The power conduits are corroded. The navigation computer uses a programming language that nobody remembers. I'm pretty sure something is living in the ventilation system on Deck 14. Brennan turned to face him. "How long until she's ready?" Torres wiped his hands on a rag that was already filthy. 2 weeks if we work around the clock. 1 week if we accept a significant chance of the reactor exploding and killing everyone aboard. The Victory will reach Earth in 10 days, Chief." Torres was silent for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "And I guess we better get creative." The crew worked with desperate intensity over the following days. They slept in shifts, catching a few hours here and there before returning to their stations. They ate their meals standing up, unwilling to waste time sitting down. They pushed themselves past exhaustion into something that felt almost like a fever dream. Lieutenant Amy Park took charge of the weapon systems. She was 34 years old, with short black hair and steady hands that never shook, no matter how much pressure she was under. She spent sleepless nights calibrating targeting computers that had been built before her grandmother was born. She learned to read displays that used symbols nobody had seen in centuries. She figured out firing sequences through trial and error, testing each weapon on asteroids until she understood exactly what the Blackstar could do. Navigator Kevin Shaw mapped jump coordinates using algorithms that had been classified since the end of the Unification Wars. He was a quiet young man with thick glasses and a mind that could calculate trajectories faster than most computers. He spent hours studying the Blackstar's ancient navigation logs, learning how the old captains had moved their ship through space during the worst fighting humanity had ever seen. Medical officer Dr. Linda Race converted cargo bays into emergency hospitals. She was a small woman with gray streaks in her brown hair and eyes that had seen too much death already. She knew what was coming. She had read the casualty reports from the first engagements with the Victory. She prepared for the worst and hoped she was wrong. On the 8th day, Samuel Torres called Captain Brennan down to the engineering section. The chief engineer stood before the main reactor controls, his face lit by the orange glow of status displays. His hands were bandaged from a plasma burn he'd received 2 days earlier, but he was smiling. "She's ready, Captain." "God help me. I don't know how, but she's ready." Brennan looked at the displays, watching power readings climb toward operational levels. The numbers meant nothing to him, but he could hear the ship around him. The Blackstar was humming, a deep vibration that he could feel in his bones. She was waking up. He walked to the nearest intercom panel and pressed the broadcast button. "All hands, this is the captain. Prepare for immediate departure. The Blackstar flies again." Throughout the ship, crew members stopped what they were doing. They looked at each other with expressions that mixed fear and hope in equal measure. Some of them prayed. Some of them cried. Some of them simply nodded and returned to their work. Patricia Vance stood on the observation deck as the Blackstar lifted from her cradle for the first time in 3 centuries. The massive engines roared to life, shaking the entire bunker with their power. She watched the ship that had been her responsibility for 3 years begin to move, and she felt tears running down her cheeks. The sleeping giant had awakened, and she was very, very angry. The Victari had never faced anything like this before. Their empire had expanded across the galaxy for 3,000 years using a simple strategy. They would arrive in overwhelming numbers, crush any resistance with brutal efficiency, and either exterminate or enslave whatever species they found. It had worked against the silicon-based crystallids, who shattered like glass under Victari weapons. It had worked against the telepathic mind-weavers, who screamed inside each other's heads as they died. It had worked against the aquatic deep-born, who boiled in their own oceans when the Victari bombed their worlds. Humanity was supposed to be the easiest conquest yet. Their ships were small and weak. Their weapons were primitive. Their society had grown soft after centuries of peace. The Dominion War Council had assigned only a fraction of their forces to this campaign. Confident that it would be over quickly, Fleet Master Xerix commanded the forward squadron that was systematically destroying human colonies along the outer rim. He was a veteran of 12 conquest campaigns, his carapace scarred from battles that had ended entire civilizations. In the past week alone, he had overseen the deaths of 3 million humans. He considered himself efficient at his work. His squadron consisted of 47 ships, a mix of destroyers and cruisers that had proven more than capable of crushing human resistance. They had just finished burning a colony called New Providence, leaving nothing but ash and corpses behind. Xerix was already planning his approach to the next target when his sensor officer made a strange clicking sound. "Fleet Master, we are detecting an unknown vessel approaching our position." Xerix turned his attention to the tactical display. A single signature was moving toward them at high speed, emerging from the darkness between stars. The ship was enormous, far larger than anything in their intelligence reports about human capabilities. Its power readings were off every scale they had. "Identify the vessel," Xerix commanded. "Unable to comply, Fleet Master. The configuration does not match any known human ship class. The vessel is broadcasting no identification signals. Its hull appears to be absorbing our sensor beams." Xerix felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize the sensation. It was confusion, an emotion his species rarely experienced. The Victari knew everything about their enemies. They studied them carefully before each conquest. This ship should not exist. He pushed the feeling aside and clicked his mandibles in the gesture that meant attack. "All ships, engage the unknown vessel. Destroy it." 47 Victari. Warships turned their weapons toward the approaching signature and opened fire. On the bridge of the USS Blackstar, Captain Marcus Brennan watched the enemy beams splash harmlessly against his ship's armor. The ancient hull plating absorbed the energy without even glowing. Warning lights flickered briefly and then went dark. "Damage report," he said calmly. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Vance checked her console. "No significant damage, Captain. Hull integrity remains at 98%. Their weapons are not powerful enough to penetrate our armor." "Good." Brennan turned to his weapons officer. "Lieutenant Park, are we in range?" Amy Park's fingers moved across her targeting console. Her hands were steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She had spent 8 days learning these weapons, understanding their capabilities. Now she would see if that knowledge was enough. Firing solution locked on lead vessels, Captain. Main batteries are charged and ready. Fire! The Blackstar's primary gun spoke for the first time in nearly 300 years. 12 Victari ships ceased to exist in the opening. Salvo. They did not explode or break apart. They simply vanished, converted into expanding clouds of superheated plasma by weapons designed to fight enemies far more powerful than insectoid aliens. The energy released was so intense that nearby Victari vessels suffered damage just from the shockwave. Fleet. Master Xerix watched his tactical display in disbelief. 12 ships gone in an instant. 12 crews dead before they could even scream. The human vessel had not slowed down or changed course. It was still coming toward them, its guns already recharging for another volley. All ships, evasive maneuvers, he ordered. His voice was not as steady as it should have been. Concentrate fire on the enemy vessel's weapon systems. The Victari fleet scattered, trying to avoid the next attack while maintaining their own barrage. Hundreds of beams and missiles struck the Blackstar from every angle. The ancient ship shuddered slightly but kept coming. Target their command vessel, Brennan said. Show them what happens when they threaten humanity. Park locked onto Xerix's flagship, a massive cruiser covered in ceremonial markings that indicated its importance. Her finger hovered over the firing control. Target locked. Captain, fire. The particle lance was the Blackstar's most powerful weapon. A concentrated beam of energy that could punch through anything ever built by human hands. It had been designed to destroy orbital fortresses and crack open enemy dreadnoughts. Against a Victari cruiser, it was absurdly excessive. Xerix had approximately 2 seconds to understand that everything he believed about the universe was wrong. Then the particle lance struck his ship and converted it into a brief second sun. The remaining Victari vessels panicked. Their coordination collapsed as the command structure disintegrated along with Xerix's flagship. Some tried to flee, engaging their jump drives in desperate attempts to escape. Others kept firing, their attacks growing more frantic and less accurate. The Blackstar destroyed them all. Her secondary batteries tracked fleeing ships with cold precision, cutting them down before they could complete their jump sequences. Her point defense system swatted missiles from the sky like insects. Her main guns fired again and again, each shot erasing another enemy from existence. When it was over, 47 Victari warships had been reduced to drifting wreckage. The engagement had lasted less than 15 minutes. On the bridge, silence hung heavy in the recycled air. The crew stared at their displays, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Many of them had expected to die today. Instead, they had won a victory so complete that it seemed almost unreal. Captain Brennan allowed himself a small smile. It was not a kind expression. Navigation. Plot a course for the colony of New Providence. Communications. Send a message to Coalition Command. Tell them the Blackstar has drawn first blood. Below them, the wreckage of the Victari squadron tumbled slowly through the void. Warning beacons from damaged ships blinked uselessly, calling for help that would never come. The message reached Earth 3 hours later. People gathered around public displays, watching the footage captured by the Blackstar's external cameras. They saw Victari ships dying by the dozen. They saw human weapons proving more powerful than anything the enemy could field. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity dared to hope that the sleeping giant had awakened, and her fury was terrible to behold. News of the Blackstar's victory spread through human space faster than any official transmission could travel. People shared the footage on every network, every platform, every communication system available. Families gathered to watch Victari ships explode over and over again. Children who had been crying for days finally slept peacefully. Adults who had been preparing to die found new strength in their hearts. Recruitment centers that had stood empty filled with volunteers overnight. Young men and women lined up around the block, demanding to serve. Retired veterans dusted off their uniforms and reported for duty. Factories that had been producing consumer goods switched to military production within hours. A species that had forgotten how to wage war was remembering very quickly. The Vectari responded with characteristic arrogance. The War Council dismissed the loss of Xerxes' squadron as a fluke, a lucky strike by desperate prey. They redirected 3 additional fleets toward Earth, confident that overwhelming numbers would crush whatever resistance the humans could offer. Captain Brennan had other plans. The Blackstar could not be everywhere at once, but she could strike anywhere without warning. Navigator Kevin Shaw had spent his time well, mapping jump coordinates throughout the entire war zone. He found paths through hyperspace that modern ships could not travel, routes that had been classified since the Unification Wars. The Blackstar used these forgotten highways to appear where the enemy least expected her. At the Battle of Titan Station, the Blackstar dropped out of hyperspace directly behind a Vectari supply convoy. The enemy ships were fat and slow, loaded with fuel and ammunition for 3 different fleets. They had minimal escorts, their commanders believing that no human ship could reach them so deep in occupied territory. The Blackstar proved them wrong. Lieutenant Park methodically destroyed every supply ship while the escorts scrambled to respond. By the time Vectari reinforcements arrived, the convoy was nothing but debris, and the Blackstar had vanished back into hyperspace. 3 enemy fleets found themselves stranded without fuel or ammunition. Easy prey for coalition hunter-killer groups. At the siege of Proxima Centauri, 2 million civilians were trapped on orbital stations as Vectari warships closed in. The enemy fleet had established a blockade, preventing any evacuation transports from escaping. They were taking their time, savoring the terror of the humans who knew death was coming. The Blackstar burst through the blockade like a battering ram through paper. Her guns cleared a corridor through the enemy formation, destroying 17 ships in the first 60 seconds of engagement. Evacuation transports flooded through the gap while the Blackstar held the Vectari at bay. She took hits from every direction, her hull glowing from absorbed energy. But she did not yield. Medical teams, prepare for casualties, Captain Brennan ordered as the ship shuddered from another impact. Engineering, I need more power to the forward shields. Chief Torres's voice came back over the intercom, strained but steady. Captain, I'm already giving you everything she's got. The port shield generator is about to fail. Then reroute power from the starboard weapons. We only need to hold for 10 more minutes. They held for 12. When the last evacuation transport made it to safety, the Blackstar withdrew through a jump point that the Vectari sensors could not even detect. She left behind 29 destroyed enemy vessels and a blockade that no longer existed. The pattern repeated across the war zone. The Blackstar would appear without warning, deliver devastating attacks, and vanish before the enemy could mount an effective response. She rescued trapped colonists. She destroyed supply lines. She assassinated enemy commanders in their flagship bridges. She became a ghost story the Vectari officers whispered about in the dark, but each engagement cost her something. Patricia Vance lost 3 of her closest friends when a Vectari suicide ship crashed into the port hangar bay. She had known those people for years, had shared meals with them, and laughed at their jokes. Now they were gone, their bodies vaporized along with half the hangar. Amy Park developed a tremor in her hands after her 40th consecutive hour at the weapons console. She refused to acknowledge it, refused to take breaks, refused to let anyone else take her station. She had become the best weapons officer in human history through nothing but determination and sleepless nights. She would not stop now. Dr. Reyes worked 20-hour shifts in the medical bay, treating wounds that should have killed the patients who bore them. She performed surgery while the ship shook from enemy fire. She held the hands of dying crew members and promised them that their sacrifice meant something. She stopped counting the dead because the numbers had become too painful. The turning point came at Jupiter's Eye, where the Vectari assembled their largest fleet yet. Over 1,000 ships gathered under the command of Supreme Fleet Master Thyrax herself. She was the greatest military mind in the Dominion, a strategist who had never lost a campaign. She had come to end the human resistance personally. The Blackstar met them alone. What followed was 12 hours of continuous combat, the longest single engagement in human history. The Vectari attacked in waves, sending squadron after squadron against the ancient battleship. They used every tactic in their arsenal. They tried to overwhelm her with numbers. They tried to flank her. They tried to board her. Nothing worked. The Blackstar fought like a wounded animal, savage and desperate, and absolutely refusing to die. Her guns fired until the barrels glowed white-hot. Her missiles depleted and her crew loaded more from reserves that should have been exhausted hours ago. Her hull breached in 17 different places, and damage control teams sealed them with whatever materials they could find. Captain Brennan stood on the bridge throughout the entire battle. He did not sit. He did not eat. He gave orders with the calm precision of a man who had accepted that death was possible, but defeat was not. Around him, his crew performed miracles of coordination and courage. "Weapons, concentrate fire on the enemy flagship," he said during the 9th hour. "Navigation, bring us alongside. If we're going down, we're taking Thyrax with us." The Blackstar turned toward the Supreme Fleet Master's vessel, her remaining guns blazing. Thyrax's flagship was the largest ship in the Vectari fleet, a mobile command center bristling with weapons and protected by the best shields the Dominion could build. The Blackstar hit her with everything she had left. Thyrax had time to send one final transmission before her ship exploded. Human intelligence intercepted the message and translated it. The Supreme Fleet Master had spoken a single word in the Vectari language, a word that roughly translated as impossible. When the battle ended, 473 Vectari ships had been destroyed. The survivors fled in complete disorder. Their command structure shattered along with Thyrax's flagship. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Dominion had lost a major engagement. The Blackstar drifted among the wreckage, her hull scarred and bleeding atmosphere from countless wounds. She had won, but the cost had been terrible. 160 crew members had died during the battle. Another 200 were wounded seriously enough to need evacuation. Captain Brennan looked at the casualty reports and felt something heavy settle in his chest. These people had trusted him. They had followed him into hell because they believed in what they were fighting for. He would make sure their sacrifice was not wasted. "Communications," he said quietly. "Send a message to Coalition Command. Tell them the road to Earth is clear. Tell them the Blackstar still flies." The message reached Earth as dawn broke over the Pacific Ocean. People who had spent the night watching news feeds saw the footage of the Vectari fleet breaking apart. They saw the Blackstar standing alone among 1,000 enemies, refusing to fall, and they knew finally that humanity would survive. The war lasted another 14 months after the Battle of Jupiter's Eye. With the Vectari advance broken, humanity finally had time to rebuild. New shipyards opened across the solar system, working around the clock to produce warships based on designs pulled from the Blackstar's ancient databases. The engineers who studied those blueprints were horrified by what they found. Their ancestors had built weapons capable of ending worlds. They had designed ships meant to fight wars of absolute destruction. Now those terrible tools would be used to save Humanity instead of destroy it. Volunteers continued pouring into the military faster than recruiters could process them. People who had never held a weapon learned to fight. Scientists who had spent their careers studying peaceful technologies turned their minds toward destruction. Artists created propaganda that stirred the blood and steeled the heart. Every human who could contribute did so. The Blackstar led the counterattack. She had been repaired at the orbital yards above Earth, her hull patched and her weapons restored. The work took 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which Captain Brennan paced the corridors like a caged animal. He hated being idle while his people fought and died without him. He hated watching the news reports that spoke of victories and defeats in equal measure. When the Blackstar returned to active duty, she was not alone. A new fleet accompanied her, ships built with the knowledge of the unification, wars and crewed by men and women who had learned to fight in the hardest possible school. They called themselves the Blackstar Fleet, and they followed their flagship into battle with absolute faith. The liberation of Arcturus was the first major offensive. Humans who had been enslaved on mining colonies rose against their captors when they saw coalition ships in orbit. The Victari garrison was caught between the Blackstar fleet above and armed workers below. They were annihilated to the last soldier dot at the Alliance Council. Representatives of 12 different species gathered aboard a neutral station. All of them had suffered under Victari rule. All of them had watched humanity fight back with growing wonder. They had come to discuss a formal alliance, a coalition of races united against the Dominion. The Blackstar stood guard outside the station during the negotiations. Her guns pointed toward the stars in case the Victari tried to interrupt. No attack came. The enemy had learned to fear that ship and the humans who crewed her. The alliance was signed 3 days later. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Victari would face opposition from multiple species working together. Captain Brennan did not live to see the final victory. He died during the assault on Fortress Nexus, a massive Victari military installation that guarded the approach to the Dominion's core worlds. The fortress was defended by 200 ships and enough firepower to crack a moon. Coalition planners estimated that taking it would cost half their fleet. Brennan had another idea. He ordered the Blackstar to charge directly at the fortress while the rest of the fleet provided cover. His ship took hit after hit, her hull breaking apart around him, her systems failing one by one. But she kept going, kept firing, kept advancing. The bridge took a direct hit during the final approach. Most of the command crew died instantly. Brennan survived long enough to give one last order. Navigation, collision course, ram the command structure. All hands, abandon ship. The crew evacuated through whatever escape pods still functioned. They watched from a distance as the Blackstar plunged into Fortress Nexus like a spear thrown by an angry god. The explosion was visible from 3 light minutes away. When the light faded, the fortress was gone. And so was Captain Marcus Brennan. He was not the only one who did not make it home. Kevin Shaw died at the 3rd Battle of Mars, his navigation station taking a direct hit from a Victari beam weapon. He was 28 years old. His parents received his medal posthumously, along with a letter he had written the night before the engagement. In it, he told them that he was proud to serve, proud to fight, proud to be human. Chief Engineer Samuel Torres survived the war, but his hands never stopped shaking from the strain of keeping the Blackstar running through battle after battle. He spent his remaining years teaching at the Engineering Academy on Luna, passing on the knowledge that had saved humanity. His students called him the miracle worker. Dr. Linda Reyes wrote a book about her experiences aboard the Blackstar. She called it The Long Night, and it became required reading at medical schools across human space. She dedicated it to the 412 crew members who died under her care. She remembered every single name. Patricia Vance rose through the ranks after the war. eventually becoming an admiral and commander of the First Fleet. She visited the site where the Blackstar made her final stand every year on the anniversary of the battle. She would stand in the debris field for hours, looking at the scattered remains of the ship that had been her home. Amy Park married a civilian engineer named Christopher Brooks. They had 2 children and lived quietly on a farming colony in the Outer Rim. She never spoke about the war to her family. Her hands eventually stopped shaking, but she still flinched at loud noises. Her daughter would later become the captain of a new battleship named the Amy Park. The war ended with the surrender of the Vectari Dominion. Their homeworld was surrounded by allied fleets, their military shattered, their population starving. The empire that had conquered 47 worlds and enslaved countless billions was broken beyond recovery. The peace treaty was signed aboard a coalition. Station orbiting Earth, human representatives, sent across from Vectari diplomats. 2 species that had tried their hardest to destroy each other. The terms were harsh, but not cruel. Humanity remembered what it felt like to fear extinction. They would not inflict that on others. The Blackstar herself was too damaged to be rebuilt. Her hull had been held together by nothing but willpower during those final months. Engineers examined the wreckage and shook their heads in amazement. The ship should have fallen apart long before Fortress Nexus. She had kept fighting through sheer stubbornness. What remained of her was gathered and placed in permanent orbit around Earth. A memorial was built on the observation deck, listing the names of every crew member who had served aboard her. The list was very long. A plaque was installed at the entrance. It reads simply, "Here stands the USS Blackstar, guardian of humanity. In our darkest hour, she answered the call. May she stand eternal, a reminder that humanity will never surrender." The galaxy learned something during those terrible years. They learned that humanity had chosen peace, not because they were weak, but because they remembered what they were capable of when pushed to the edge. They had buried their most terrible weapons and sworn never to use them again. The Vectari had forced them to break that promise. Now, the universe knew what happened when humanity went to war. They knew about the ancient ships that waited in the darkness, ready to be awakened if needed. They knew about the fury that slept behind peaceful smiles and diplomatic handshakes. The Blackstar had reminded everyone of a simple truth. Humanity could be the kindest species in the galaxy when given the choice, but threaten their survival, and nothing in the universe would survive the consequence. The memorial orbited Earth for centuries, a silent guardian watching over the planet below. School children visited on field trips. Veterans came to pay their respects. Aliens traveled from distant worlds just to see the ship that had broken an empire. And somewhere in the darkness beyond Neptune, in bunkers and hidden bases scattered across the outer solar system, other ships waited in silence. They were older than the Blackstar, more powerful, more terrible. They slept in the cold and the dark, dreaming of wars that had ended centuries ago. They hoped they would never be needed. But if the call came, they would answer. Humanity had learned its lesson well. Peace was precious and worth protecting. But the weapons of war would never be destroyed completely. They would be hidden, forgotten, allowed to gather dust in the darkness, until the next time someone threatened the survival of the human race. Then, the sleeping giants would wake again, and the galaxy would remember why humanity was not to be trifled with.